The summer of polls continues. This time on Poll Hub, our team keeps cranking even in the dog days of August, with more polls in states everybody is watching in November. Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Texas are traditionally pretty predictable, but in 2018, they could all surprise. So we'll unpack all the new numbers and look at how, along with the other state polls we've done this summer, a strong political narrative has formed as we head into the fall. Hey, and whatever happened to summer vacation around here? And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
So are we sick of polling yet? What is with this summer and
polls?
No,
we're just getting started. Come on.
So we've done another trio of states, and this trio is a little unusual because two of the three you wouldn't think there would be a lot of interest in, Texas and Illinois. Traditionally, one is very Democratic, one's very Republican. Both are states that you wouldn't think there'd be much of a guess about. Pennsylvania, very different story, especially after 2016 when Pennsylvania surprised everybody.
Yes, a big shocker then.
So let's start with that. What's happening in Pennsylvania? What are we seeing? And is Pennsylvania set to shock us in 2018 again? Is it realigned? What are we seeing?
Well, I think what's really interesting about Pennsylvania is that's exactly where Hillary Clinton had based her strategy. She really thought that she could make inroads among women in the suburbs of the larger cities, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Republican-leaning independent women. That was going to be the secret to her success.
How'd that turn out?
Well, in 2018, I think it may be very different. And
so she was
obviously
she was ahead of her time.
She was really focusing and targeting on that group. She thought that was a group that had differences of opinion with Republicans as Republicans move forward, move farther to the right, particularly on social issues. That was really a group that she felt that she could appeal to. And for a long time, she was. I think what changed for her was the fact that once it looked like she was going to win and perhaps even get the Senate, that's not something that these voters were particularly interested in. And so now what we see in 2018 is we see a very similar pattern. And we're seeing that movement in Pennsylvania. It's really blue right now. Bob Casey, running for Senate to be reelected to the Senate, is solidly in front of his opponent, Tom Wolf, for governor, again looking for reelection. He has a strong 14-point lead over his challenger, Scott Wagner. And even when we look at the congressional generic in this state, we are seeing a pretty significant gap. 51% of voters are looking to vote for a Democrat in their district, 39% for the Republican. So right now, California is in the oh boy, am I thinking warmer climates or what? Pennsylvania is in the Democratic
so's California
column. Well, that made more sense actually.
And we saw this with the Connor Lamb victory. Remember the special election out in Pittsburgh, a district that was super Republican. Democrats, were hoping that it would signal some shift earlier this year, that the blue wave was real, and indeed Connor Lamb won. So this is at least kind of backs up what we saw earlier in the year. It doesn't seem like things are changing, kind of the Republicans' way here. If anything, maybe it's moving even more blue.
Well, Trump really looms large, and I know we're going to say that a lot when we're looking at these three states. Lee's shaking his head. I know Texas is definitely different. But what we're seeing is that Trump's approval rating is really underwater by 14 points. He has a 38% approval rating. Certainly not the lowest among these states or the 9 states that we've done thus far, but very low, comparatively speaking.
So let's talk about Illinois.
Before you turn to Illinois, Jay, I was just thinking about one thing I think about Pennsylvania is interesting. We're seeing this in some of the other states, traditionally in the industrial Midwest, when we polled Michigan and we polled Wisconsin. those states, Minnesota a little bit further out, we're seeing that what Trump, the inroads he made, don't seem to be carrying over to 2018, the midterm election. So if he's going to run into trouble in the mids, it may very well be in the states that we've been talking about. Now that's your setup for Illinois.
Well,
Yeah, so-
but I did have one other thing
I thought
since
you
you
might.
brought that up, because I mean, one of the things that we are seeing, in our polls, and it's not consistent across states, but it is something we are seeing, particularly in Pennsylvania, is the difference in enthusiasm between Democrats and Republicans. And I think that that's why we've kind of moved Pennsylvania right now into the Democratic column. It's not just that we're seeing these wide differences between Democrats and Republicans running for office statewide, but we're also seeing an enthusiasm gap. When we're asking voters, how important they see this election, we see that Democrats, 81%, say that it's very important, and this compares to 65% of Republicans. Certainly, the 65% is impressive, but it doesn't compare to the enthusiasm and the energy that we're seeing on the Democratic side in this state.
Yeah, so Pennsylvania, very important for Democrats right now. Illinois, even more so, a 21% difference among Democrats in terms of their enthusiasm. So, Jay, what else are we learning about in Illinois?
Yeah, so Illinois is not exactly a state that we would normally go out polling thinking that it was going to be decisive one way or another, because Illinois has been Democratic, at least in presidential elections, for a very long time. Now, that being said, there's a Republican governor there, so it's a little bit like some other states like Massachusetts, which is a heavily Democratic state. They have a Republican governor. Vermont, a state where Bernie Sanders, a socialist, is a senator, has a Republican governor. So there are states like this where there is a bit of a mix. In this case, though, Donald Trump, and I think this one stands out to me as nationally, Donald Trump is underwater on his approval rating. But in Illinois, it's 31% approve and 56% disapprove. He's doing as badly here as he's done in any of the states we've looked at. And just like you said, Democrats are enthused, Republicans don't tend to be. Here's what stood out to me, though, when I'm looking at these numbers and so many of these other states we've looked at in the industrial and upper Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as we just talked about. In all of those cases, there's a gender gap, and there's an education gap, if you will. White voters with a college degree, white voters without, that is Democratic on one side and Republican on another. In this case, there are gender gaps, there are education gaps. But let's look at the gender gap. Women favor Democrats to control Congress 54-30. Men favor Democrats 44-39. So both men and women in Illinois are actually favoring Democrats just by a smaller margin. And white voters are 43 Democrat, 42 GOP control. So even in that number, which we have not seen in some of these other states, even white voters just across the board have slightly favor Democrats. So I think what we look at here is a state that is predictably heavily Democratic and maybe one of the worst case scenarios for Donald Trump. One quick note, and that is this governor's race we talked about. Bruce Rauner is the GOP incumbent, and let's keep in mind that Illinois is really good at getting governors into jail. They do that. They do that better than we do, even in New York.
In New York, I know.
Yeah.
And
What is it, like
that's
4 of
hard
the
to
last
do.
5 or something?
They're on a hot streak. Yeah, if this was a baseball team, it would be the Red Sox this year. Sorry, but so anyway, no incumbent governor in Illinois is ever popular, and this is the case here. At least it has been for the last 20 years. J.D. Pritzker, who won the Democratic nomination, is at 46 to Bruce Rauner, who's the incumbent, at 30%. And the intensity level, which we've been looking at, is roughly the same here. Rauner's is actually slightly
Were you
higher.
surprised about that, given the distance?
Well, yes and no. If you look at the knowns, how many people know? Everybody knows Rauner, and fewer people know Pritzker. And I think it's just a matter of Pritzker has a lot of money to spend on ads, and once he makes himself better known, I would think that intensity of support might go up. But honestly, if you're an Illinois voter, how intensely can you support any of these guys knowing that whoever you put in is likely to go to jail? The odds are The odds are it's going to get attacked.
You don't want to bet against it. But I think also in the case of the Democrat, because he's not as well known, the support he has may be some of the anti-incumbent Republican, so he's getting some soft support. And also because he has so many people, almost a majority right now in our poll, it makes sense that if he's not that well known, some of it's going to be thin support, which is likely, if he runs a decent campaign, to solidify as November approaches. But that's something to see.
Yeah, Illinois certainly looks like a pickup opportunity on the governor's side for Democrats, for whatever that's worth. So do we want to talk about Texas, or do you have something else on the
No, I think we're good on Illinois. Just you did touch upon one interesting thing, is that there are, oddly enough, Republican governors in blue states, and I think after November we're going to be seeing some Democratic governors in traditionally red states. So that's kind of like an odd inversion and maybe counterintuitive, but everything is counterintuitive right now in our politics. So anyway, Texas, an interesting state, and perhaps I would like to claim it as the most exceptional of the states that we're looking at right now, in that this is a state that Donald Trump, his approval rating actually among registered voters is not upside down. It's right side up, 47 to 45. Among adults as a whole, he's slightly upside down. But this is a place where his strongly approves are only slightly less than his strongly disapproves. Around the country, you always hear about the strongly at the intensity. It's much more negative than it is positive. Not so in Texas, pretty close. And in terms of his approval rating up against these other two states, certainly, and up against the 9 that we've polled this summer, Texas is tied for first for Trump in his approval rating with Arizona, which we polled. So that's, I think, one of the things. And also, Texas really stands out. I guess that's maybe why it's the Lone Star State. It's by itself right now. In terms of the congressional,
among these
states that we've polled,
that we've polled that tend to be more contested.
Yes, that's true also. But in the congressional generic question that we hear so much about, of the 9 states we've polled, Texas is the only one that more people are telling us they're going to vote for a Republican for Congress, not a Democrat. It's a +7 Republican. You're hearing how the nation is +7 Democrat or +8, whatever. This one's +7 Republican. And also when it comes to, I'm sorry, that question, I twisted that. That's on the control of Congress, whether you want to see the Republicans or Democrats in control of Congress. That's the +7. The analysis is the same, but the number's +3 in Texas. So it's not +7, that's +3. Both questions, these are the only states of the 9 that we've done. The generic question and the who do you want to see in control of Congress. This is the only one where the Republicans are dominating. And then Barb talked and Jay, you talked about how important races are. Well, Texas is one where people think Republicans and Democrats pretty much equally think this is an important election in the midterms. So no Democratic enthusiasm advantage in Texas. Very different than what we've been seeing elsewhere. So that sets the stage. Donald Trump not doing too badly. Generic questions pro-Republican. Enthusiasm, not the Democrats' advantage. And then we go to the contests themselves. So let's start.
Yeah, you're burying the lead.
Yeah, well, I'm building suspense. I'm building suspense. Okay.
2 ways to look at that.
Yes, I thought so. I spun it my way. So we have Ted Cruz looking to be reelected. He won last time, filling the seat of Kay Bailey Hutchinson. Right now, that's an interesting race for the Senate. Cruz is being challenged by an energetic, grassroots kind of guy, Beto O'Rourke, who's been going all over the state constantly and sending out videos and tweeting all kinds of things. Anyway, Cruz has a narrow lead in that, 4 points. It's one to be watched as we go down the road. I think that one of the reasons Cruz is both doing decently and not so decently has to do with Latino voters, many of whom are not familiar with O'Rourke. And ultimately, they may hold the key, a big voting group in Texas, as to whether O'Rourke can pull off a big upset or Cruz is reelected. Right now, it's Cruz's to lose. But it is an interesting race and one we're certainly going to be watching. Barb, did you want to jump in on that?
Well, it's just, I mean, also the fact that Texas generally does tend to be so Republican. Still, I mean, I think we were looking at Texas as a state that is Republican, but maybe changing, just as we were looking at Illinois as a state that's Democrat, but maybe changing. And so right now, I think what we're seeing is not as big a change as people may have anticipated in either of these states. But certainly the Cruz reelect is something to watch, because O'Rourke certainly has a lot of energy. And when we look at registered voters, both Cruz and O'Rourke have positive ratings among registered voters.
Yeah, and clearly O'Rourke has gotten Cruz's attention. Cruz has taken out some ads to try to define O'Rourke early so that people get to know O'Rourke on Cruz's terms, not in terms of how he
Other than just waiting to see if he's going to knock on their door, because that's his MO. That's his thing, right?
Yeah.
That he's going to go to every county in Texas, which certainly is no small feat, and actually meet people door to door.
And as you alluded to, this is a state where we have seen demographic changes. It's becoming younger, it's becoming more Latino, and it's becoming more competitive. So people have been looking at Texas. Can Texas actually flip? And in the presidential election 2 years ago, that was one that Clinton only lost by 9 points. 9 is a big number, but Texas was actually closer than some states that she thought she was going to do well in. So Texas, more competitive. Now we can see in the Senate, it's 4 points right now. It's got attention. It's on the map. But that, is still an uphill fight for Democrats, because it's about 30 years since a Democrat has won either the governorship or a Senate seat in Texas. So it would certainly have to really shatter history. Speaking of which, the governor's race, we see Abbott, the incumbent, looking for a second term, and he's got a substantial lead over Lupe Valdez, 19 points right now. And that one does not look to be all that competitive. Not only is Abbott in front, but those who say they strongly support a candidate also are more likely to be in Abbott's column. So right now, if you had to look at Texas, which we just did, you see a governor's race that's likely not to change, a Senate race that's somewhat up in the air, and one that's going to get, I think, a lot of attention before we're done with this.
So how do these three states? We've now added these 3 to 6 others. How do they inform the narrative, for the midterms this fall?
Well, there's 2 things that I see, and one of them is just a question that I think we are not able to answer, and I think there's some interesting things to look out for. When we talk about the different demographic groups and how much they support Trump or not, and I do think that one of the narratives here, and that's kind of my second point that we'll get to in a second, is that this is really all about Trump. And it's all about Donald Trump for Democrats, and it's all about Donald Trump for Republicans, whether they support him or not, and those who don't aren't particularly energetic. But I was looking at the Hispanic or the Latino crosstabs, Latino support. And I looked at it just for Donald Trump. And there's 4 states that we looked at. We asked this question, and it's really interesting. Texas, Florida, Arizona, and Illinois, where there were enough Latinos to be able to pull some numbers. And when we look at like African-American support for Donald Trump, it's always in the single digits. It's very low. But that's not so with Latinos, which is interesting because of his immigration positions, which I think are generally seen to be kind of broadly anti-immigrant, and maybe broadly, depending on how you look at it, broadly anti-Hispanic. So in Texas, he's got a 27% approval rating among Latinos. In Florida, it's 40%. Not so much a surprise because the Cuban Americans who are Latinos are traditionally much more conservative. In Arizona, though, it's 29%. So not quite 1 in 3 Latinos in Arizona, most of them are Mexican immigrants or from Central America, support the president. And then in Illinois, and this is why I'm bringing this up, because in Illinois, we're looking at this, and 17% there. So that's almost 1 in 5 in Illinois are supporting the president. Why is this? Why is it?
Yeah, well, I would suggest that maybe immigration isn't the only issue for those voters. You know,
And also, I mean, this is not a group. I mean, we tend to, to demographically kind of, lump people in categories. The Latino community is an incredibly diverse community, as you even mentioned, Jay. They come from many places, from all over the world. So this is a very diverse community. This is a community that has also a very rich American history, and so I think it's always. We should always be cautious, when we start looking at groups and thinking of them as moving, kind of as one solid group.
Yeah, and to underscore that point, in Texas, the state we were talking about just moments ago, among Latino population, the number one issue, the economy and jobs, not immigration. That's the second issue. But you would think, just from a distance, that immigration would be the huge deal in states where with immigration, and it's not economy and jobs, not unlike anybody else. The economy and jobs is driving people's measurement of that.
No, and I understand. I'm not trying to argue that Latinos in this case are a monolithic group as much as
absolutely.
it's surprising. And Arizona is a particularly good example because the Latino community population in Arizona is pretty homogenous in terms of the countries they're from and their experiences. But I worked there a long time ago. I worked there in the 80s and early 90s. And there was always a very significant divide between people who had been there for a generation or two and newer immigrants. And
absolutely.
I'm wondering if that's some of what we see is in states like Texas and Arizona, where it's over 25% support Donald Trump, is that there are people of Latino descent who have been here long enough that we may put them into the box, or they may check the box that they're Latino, but that they're not in their politics. If we think of politics being kind of zero-sum game, you're either this or that, and they're not that in the case of Donald
absolutely.
Trump.
And they, I think also Latinos. As a group, and again, we're not making generalizations, but they do tend to be more conservative politically. And I think it's actually speaks to how the Republicans, have missed an opportunity to really have a great deal of support among this community because of the issue of immigration. In other words, actually, if we flip it, I mean, Latinos generally tend to align policy-wise and issue-wise closer to the Republican Party than they do to the Democratic Party. But because of this issue of immigration and the stance that President Trump, as well as other members of the party, have taken on immigration, I think they've missed an opportunity to have the support of this community.
Yeah,
so the other big trend then, I think, is that this is all about Trump. That's what I've seen across these 9 states is 2018 midterm elections is essentially a referendum on Donald Trump.
And midterm elections often do come down to that, as did the Obama midterm elections as well. And that's why we've been having so many sweeping change elections. But Jay, you made a reference to something, and moving along now, you said when you were working in Arizona, and that sort of helped you understand a little bit about what's going on today. And we thought we'd take a little bit here in the, as you say, the dog days of summer, take a moment to look at some of the things the three of us have done along the road to becoming who we are today. Now, I know, but maybe, Jay, we could start off with you. I'm thinking that I saw you many, many years ago as a weatherman on TV. Tell us a little bit about maybe that or other things you think might have shaped the person you are today.
Sure. Well, there's 2 things. I was a journalist, television journalist for 23 years, and my first job, to get the first job, which was in Davenport, Iowa, the only way I could get it was if I would agree to be a weekend weather person. So I have my master's in journalism, not meteorology. So I couldn't really say no, though, because this was in the recession of the later 80s, and getting a job at all was in television was something of a tough road to hoe. So that's how I got into doing weather. And it's interesting because in Arizona, I was the investigative reporter and the morning weather person, which means I did an Al Roker kind of thing. I'd go out and talk to people and goof around, and then I'd come back and work with my producers. And we did stories about like the two governors in a row not quite in a row. There was one in between who both left office in disgrace because of investigative stories that we participated in. We weren't the only ones. So I was kind of I had a very dual role there.
So you might say that if you were doing investigation, you could combine both of those and say a cloud is forming over the lieutenant governor's career or something like that.
But you've been making predictions then for quite a long time.
Yeah,
I have. Although here's where that weather thing was super helpful. Is when you do weather on television, there's no script, there's no teleprompter, there's nothing that you read, and anchors read scripts, right? They may write them, and they can certainly ad lib in a breaking news situation, and reporters ad lib all the time. I mean, that's what we do. But nothing prepares you to speak extemporaneously, either in front of a live audience, a big group, like when I talk to a group of students, or I have spoken at conventions and conferences with hundreds or thousands of people in the audience. Nothing prepares you better than a camera facing you with a green thing behind you, a green wall. There's no real map there. And you've got to ad lib for 3 minutes about the weather in Arizona, where the forecast is hot and sunny today, hot and sunny tomorrow, hot and sunny on Thursday, hot and sunny Friday. Looking ahead to the weekend, looks like it's going to be
hot and sunny.
Yes, I got it. Okay. Barb, let's turn it to the tables on to your things in your past that might have prepared you for a life of number counting as a pollster.
Good heavens! This is a tough one. Well, I spent many a summer in my parents' greenhouse business. I have absolutely no talent whatsoever for growing things. They put me at the very start, so I would take the little seedlings and I would have to transplant them. And certainly, there's a lot about polling that is tedious and time-consuming, but you actually have to do it correctly, or as we would say in the greenhouse, the seedlings will not grow. So
Boy, is that a stretch?
So I guess my kind of farm life certainly gave me a sense of how to stick with things, and how to kind of find the interesting in something that is very routine. I did go on to then work as a teller in a bank.
That's a counting thing. That's
and
very
that
counting.
That's closer.
And that was counting. But see, we had to, at the end of the day, I think the stress for me in the bank was that we had to pop, which means we had to proof on the penny. And I actually
no error margin?
No error margin. So I'm much more comfortable in polling, given that I can have a plus
Boy.
or minus one way or the other.
I'm not so sure this topic is turning out the way I had envisioned, or maybe it's even more so. I also know, Barb, that you are probably the only pollster who knows how to milk a cow.
Yeah, it was a farm life. We didn't. The business was for plants and herbs and flowers and vegetables. But we had lots of critters, as we like to say, of all kinds of, feathers, fur, and stripes. So yes, I did milk a cow. Her name was Eleanor. And
did she become a rug or dinner?
No, neither. Eleanor.
I knew that.
Eleanor was a Guernsey cow, and when she was in the field with the wild strawberries, the milk was delicious, and so was the butter. But when she got into the wild onions, nobody wanted to eat or drink it. We gave it to the dogs. So how about you, Lee? You
proudly,
you
yes.
spent a lot of summers too in a family business.
Yeah, my parents had a soda and beer place when I was growing up, and we used to sell bottled siphon seltzer. You know, those ones that are used in comedy shows very often. But we had 10,000 of those, and I still have a couple with my father's initials on them. But I am probably
And those are actually pretty special.
yeah,
bottles.
absolutely.
They were hand blown.
And hand-blown Czechoslovakian glass, no seam in them. But I should point out, lest I go down, there's no graphics here, so I can't demonstrate, but I am the only person, I'm sure, who conducts polling, who knows how to fix a seltzer bottle. I was also a bottle sorter, which is a slightly different training there. But if you take bottles and you sort of have to look at them and then put them in their proper cases, gosh, that sounds a lot like coding open-ended questions to me. I don't know.
Or sorting opinions.
Yeah, but I have two other things I did, which I think were definitely right up the alley that I ended up pursuing. But in the summer in college, I was a mailman. I was going door to door.
Oh, I was kind of missing what the link was there, because I know you ran into some trouble with some neighborhood dogs.
Dogs, absolutely. And then let me just close out by saying, when I was in college, I on weekends would run the switchboard in our dorm.
Dear.
I don't think anybody ever got connected to the person they were trying to reach.
Did you ever listen in?
No, I did not listen in because I couldn't make even the connection to listen in. It was chaos. However, our phone room, thankfully, I know enough not to get involved. And therefore, it runs a lot better.
The switchboards have kind of gone the way of other technology as well.
So Jay, did we cover all of your past, or was there something else that you might want to throw into the mix here?
I think we covered all of my past that I'm willing to disclose.
Okay.
Wise, very, very wise.
And that will definitely do it for this edition of Poll Hub, which is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And still here after having to be listening through that last segment is Mary Griffith, our executive producer. Kenny Marples, our editor, AWOL today.
That's
here?
okay. He'll still do a lot of work. But he is
you don't need the editor in the room.
That's true also.
Yes, and he has band practice this week, so he's getting ready for the football season at Marist College.
Okay.
So I think that
multi-talented our editor.
Always.
Okay.
So we would also like to thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University, who provides us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions and results over the decades.
And we always like to take your questions and answer your questions. And especially with all the polls we've been doing this summer, we've been getting a lot of questions and comments. So keep them coming, because I think we learn more from you and you learn more from us when we're in a conversation. Send your questions to pollhub@marist.edu. You can also reach out on social media. That's maybe the better way to do it, because we're monitoring it all the time. At Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And of course, as we say every week, look down at whatever device you're listening to this podcast on. There's a little button that says subscribe. Tap it. That way, when we come back with the next episode, you will be alerted or warned, or whatever the word you may choose to use. And remember that even though it's the dog days of August, we do not pause our production schedule. We will be back next week, the final week of the summer, with another edition of Poll Up.